I received an unexpected call from my daughter a few days before my birthday. When I answered, I noticed my unhappy son-in-law's voice in the background. While talking to my daughter, I realized I could clearly hear his manipulative whispers. That's when my daughter said something that made my heart stop. My name is Edward, and at 68, I carry my life not as a burden, but like a river that sometimes flows serene, and other times encounters unexpected rapids. The scent of worked wood and damp earth has always been the perfume of my peace, the aroma of my cabin. It was our sanctuary, mine and Sophia's, my late wife, a place built with our own hands, board by board, dream by dream. Every plank, every stone on the path leading to the door held a memory, a laugh, a tight embrace. Now it was up to me to be the guardian of these memories, a man life had taught to be resilient, attached to integrity, and with a protective instinct that many, perhaps, saw as mere stubbornness. My wrinkles, etched by time and weather, told stories my words could barely express. But the wall I had built around my heart, more a fortress of love for Sophia than of seclusion, began to tremble with a simple phone call. It was from Anne, my daughter. Her voice, once a balm that calmed any storm in my soul, now sounded distant, polished by a formality I didn't recognize. There was an inexplicable coldness that had settled between us since she married Richard, an invisible but palpable barrier. With every conversation, I felt a tightness in my chest, as if the essence of my little girl was being slowly molded by an influence I could hardly decipher. Or perhaps that I preferred not to decipher so as not to confront the pain. "Dad, I need the cabin for your birthday weekend," she said, the sentence more of a demand than a request, thrown out without preamble, as if she were arranging an appointment in her busy schedule. The initial surprise caught me off guard. The silence that followed her words was filled by a warm inkling that blossomed in my chest, lighting a spark of hope. My eyes filled with a sweetness they hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps she was, after all, planning a surprise celebration for me. A shy, almost childish smile bloomed on my aged lips. The idea of having my daughter and maybe even Richard by my side on such a significant day warmed me in a way I hadn't realized how much I yearned for. My delusion was as swift as it was painful. A cold shock that shot through my body, undoing the ephemeral joy. The party wasn't for me. Those words hit me with the force of a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. The silence on the phone line seemed to mock my naivety. "It's for Richard's family, Dad, 30 relatives," she continued, her voice without a hint of hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. 30, I repeated, feeling the air grow heavy, thin, difficult to breathe. The cabin, with its 3 cozy bedrooms, was a refuge, a nest of love and memories. Not a banquet hall capable of housing a crowd. It was a sanctuary of peace, not a stage for display. Her motivation was crystal clear, painfully so to me. It wasn't about affection, nor about rekindling our old closeness. It was to impress her husband's new family, to show off a grandeur that wasn't hers, but that she saw in our cabin. Richard, my son-in-law, a man whose ambition was as visible as his subtle contempt for everything that represented the simplicity and authenticity of our family, was the true architect of this plan. He wanted the status the cabin provided, the perfect backdrop to assert himself in front of people who, I knew, valued appearance more than substance. And I, the father, the owner of those memories and that home, was just an inconvenient detail to be discarded. My internal conflict was a battlefield, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The unconditional love of a father, a flame I believed to be unquenchable, warred against the wounded man, the owner violated in his own home, in his most intimate memories. I tried to argue, suggested other dates, other places, anything that might divert the course of this invasion. "Anne, honey, The cabin can't hold that many people. We can find another solution, one that's more comfortable for everyone. I tried, my voice thick with hurt and incomprehension, but her response, delivered with a cutting coldness, was a final blow, a shard that struck what was left of my heart. Don't even think about showing up. You're not welcome. The humiliation was amplified by the method. She made sure to say it during a video call, with her husband smirking discreetly over her shoulder, a smirk loaded with triumph, which ignited a flame that had long lain dormant in me. The once overwhelming sadness converted into a silent, cold, and determined fury. They not only wanted me out, but they planned to use my sanctuary to celebrate my own birthday without my presence. I could not allow that. The period that followed, the month leading up to the fateful date, was a plunge into strategy and pain, a bitter mixture I tried to digest in silence. Each day was a battle fought within me, between the deep sorrow of a spurned father and the obstinacy of a man who refused to be humiliated in his own home, on his own birthday. Richard's smirk, that mocking smile I couldn't erase from my mind, was the fuel that kept the flame of my determination burning. I didn't want revenge in the petty sense of the word, but rather justice, a restoration of the dignity they had tried to strip from me. I began my quiet investigation, like a detective of my own life, searching the cracks of the past for a clue, a detail that could turn the tables. I remembered an old folder of Sophia's documents, kept with almost reverent care in the office that was once hers. That room, with its characteristic smell of old paper and the dried lavender she so loved, had always been a refuge for me after she passed, a place where her presence was still tangible. Amidst papers for landscaping projects she would never see blossom and mementos of our trips, I found the original deed to the cabin. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the time-yellowed document, and there it was, clear and undeniable, a life estate clause in my name, a legal detail my daughter, in her eagerness to please and impress, had never bothered to check. This was my first spark of power, a glimmer of hope that made me breathe more deeply. That seemingly insignificant piece of paper was the shield I needed. I contacted an old friend, Dr. Walter Jennings, a retired lawyer with whom I used to play chess on Sunday afternoons before Sophia's illness robbed us of that small pleasure. His voice, hoarse and wise, answered the phone with the familiarity of one who knows the other's soul. I explained the situation, the words coming out with a lump in my throat, mixed with shame and contained anger. He listened patiently, without interrupting, and at the end, a thoughtful silence filled the line. "Edward, my old friend," he said, his voice conveying a comforting calm. "That document is ironclad. The cabin is yours, legally. No one can take it from you, not even your daughter, as long as you're alive." The document's unshakable strength was confirmed by his expertise, and a feeling of relief, mixed with a new wave of determination, washed over me. During our conversation, as we discussed the legal nuances, he casually mentioned the unstable business of Richard's father, Mr. Harrington. "Your son-in-law's father, a businessman known more for his appearance than for his results. Isn't that right, Edward?" Walter commented, his voice laced with a hint of irony. That piece of information, thrown out casually, resonated in my mind. A subplot began to emerge. Richard wasn't just seeking a weekend of leisure or empty ostentation. He needed to project an image of success and access, a facade of prosperity for potential investors who would be among the 30 relatives. The piece fit. Simple vanity transformed into a game of interests far more complex and, to me, far more repugnant. But the humiliation, as if that weren't enough, did not cease. A few days later, the mailman brought a letter that made me shudder. A formal invitation, on glossy paper with gold lettering, to an autumn celebration at the address of my cabin on the exact date of my birthday. A cold note handwritten at the bottom in my son-in-law's unmistakable script, sentenced, "Just so you know, we'll be having a great time." It was a calculated mockery, a direct provocation designed to inflict the greatest possible pain. I felt a shiver of rage run down my spine. My daughter, for her part, called sporadically, alternating between false promises to make it up to me later and veiled threats that if I made things difficult, our relationship could end for good. "Dad, please, don't complicate things. We can spend time together another time," she would say, her voice slightly impatient, as if I were an obstacle to be circumvented in her plans. "I don't want us to grow apart because of this," she would add, and I could feel the tone of reprimand, almost of emotional blackmail in her words. Each call was a painful reminder of the daughter I was losing to another man's ambition, and with each word of hers, the wall around my heart grew a little higher, not to protect me from the pain, but to protect the dignity I had left. The game was set, and I had to play. I had to show them that integrity and respect were not negotiable. My revenge, or rather my quest for reparation and justice, began to be sculpted in those sleepless nights, where the only sound was the creaking of the cabin's wood and the whisper of the wind through the pines. I didn't sleep, but I thought. I thought of Sophia, of her smile, of the way she always found beauty in simplicity and strength in truth. I thought of the values we tried to instill in Anne: kindness, empathy, respect. Where had they been lost? That question echoed in my chest like a cracked bell. I didn't want to hurt my daughter, but I needed to protect her from herself, from the influence that was turning her into someone I barely recognized, and to protect Sophia's legacy, which to me was priceless. The first step was to reach out to my in-laws, Sophia's siblings, Aunt Laura, the eldest, with her impeccably neat grey hair and an expression that had seen it all, and Uncle Frank, a man of few words but with an immense heart. They lived in the neighboring town, in a humble little house that Sophia loved to visit. I called Laura first, my voice trembling as I recounted what had happened. There was a heavy silence on the other end of the line, and I could imagine the shocked expression on her face. "Edward, my God, how could Anne do such a thing?" she finally managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "It's an affront, a disrespect to Sophia's memory and to you." Her indignation was genuine, and it brought me some relief. I wasn't alone. I invited them to the cabin so we could talk in person, away from prying ears and judging eyes. They arrived 2 days later, bringing an apple spice cake, Sophia's favorite, as if trying to fill the void she left with small gestures of affection. We sat on the porch, facing the mirrored lake, the same lake where Sophia and I would spend hours just watching time go by. I told them everything, from Anne's cold call to Richard's mocking invitation. Every word, every detail of the humiliation seemed to weigh on my shoulders. With each report, I saw fury grow in Laura's eyes, while Frank clenched his fists, his face creased in an expression of pure disbelief. "They don't just want you out, Edward. They want to desecrate your home, our Sophia's sanctuary, for a show-off party," Laura exclaimed, her voice louder than usual. "This is unacceptable. Sophia would never have allowed such disrespect." Frank, who rarely spoke, nodded in agreement, and I could see the emotion in his eyes, a shared pain for his sister's memory. They were appalled, shocked by the lack of respect, and their reactions validated my feelings, assuring me I wasn't overreacting. They became my accomplices, my silent allies, ready to support whatever was necessary. It was then that I presented them with the idea that had been hammering in my head. "I have a plan," I began, my voice firmer now, feeling the strength of having them by my side. "We're not going to confront them with shouts or fights. We're going to confront them with kindness, with the love that Sophia always preached." Laura looked at me with a raised eyebrow, curious. Frank, for his part, just encouraged me with a slight nod. The plan was elegant and required flawless execution, a chess game where every move would be calculated to disarm the opponents without a single violent piece. My nephew, Luke and Laura's son, who had a small event planning company, was crucial. He was a smart young man with a good heart and a sharp sense of humor. I called him, and he agreed to come to the cabin the next morning. When I explained the situation, his face turned pale with disbelief, but then a spark of determination lit up in his young eyes. "Uncle Edward, whatever you need, I'm here," he said, his voice firm. "Letting Richard and Anne do this would be a disgrace to all of us." Luke helped me reserve the cabin for an event on the same weekend as my birthday, without Anne and Richard having the slightest idea. But not just any event. I wanted something that echoed Sophia's soul, something she would have loved. I thought of the many times she spoke to me about the importance of helping the elderly, those who are often forgotten. And that's when the idea took shape in my mind, bright and pure as the morning sun. I used some of the savings Sophia had left to sponsor a weekend retreat for a charity she loved, an organization that offered support and activities for lonely seniors. It was the Hope's Harbor Senior Center, a place Sophia had always supported with her time and affection. The cabin would be, for one weekend, a sanctuary for those who most needed a hug. The irony was sweet, but the purpose sublime. Luke, with his expertise in events, contacted the institution. They were thrilled with the offer and embraced the idea with enthusiasm. We discreetly publicized the event in the local media, in the small community newspapers, as a posthumous tribute to my wife, celebrating her legacy of compassion, right on my birthday weekend. The setting, once intended for ostentation, was renamed a sanctuary of generosity. The preparations began, and every detail was thoughtfully planned. From the meals to the activities that would be offered to the seniors, that cabin, our home, was about to be filled with a new energy, a new purpose. But the real surprise was yet to come, and I knew that Anne and Richard had no idea of the twist that awaited them. In the days that followed, the cabin transformed into a hive of activity, a bustle of preparations that contrasted with the quiet that had inhabited it since Sophia's departure. I, who had for years been immersed in an almost monotonous routine, rediscovered an energy in myself I thought I had lost. My hands, calloused by time and work, now moved with a renewed purpose. Sophia would be proud, I knew. Her memory was my strength, the wind in my sails. Luke, my nephew, was a true force of nature. He coordinated everything with admirable efficiency, but without losing the sensitivity I so valued. His phones never stopped ringing. His notes filled notebooks, and his eyes shone with the passion of someone doing something they believe in. He brought his small team, a group of enthusiastic young people who moved through the cabin with a lightness and respect that moved me. Chairs and tables were rearranged to create more welcoming spaces. Wildflowers picked from the surroundings adorned the corners, and small wooden plaques with inspirational quotes, hand-picked by Sophia from her old diaries, were scattered throughout the gardens. My sister-in-law, Laura, and Uncle Frank also threw themselves into it heart and soul. Laura, with her culinary talent, took over the kitchen, planning a simple but comforting menu with aromas that harked back to childhood, to Grandma's cakes and herbal teas. Frank, in his usual silence, took care of the practical details, maintaining the garden, arranging the chairs on the porch, checking every light bulb. Seeing my family united, working for a cause that celebrated Sophia's generosity, was a balm for my soul. The sadness over the distance from Anne mixed with a sweet gratitude for having these people in my life. The calls from Anne and Richard, meanwhile, continued to come, laden with a growing irritation. Anne, with her voice that seemed increasingly distant, questioned my plans, unaware of their true scale. "Dad, what are you going to do that weekend?" "It's important that the cabin is free," she would say, her voice bordering on impatience. I maintained a calm, almost naive tone, responding evasively. "Oh, honey, I have some commitments. Old things, you know. Nothing that will interfere with your plans. Don't worry." I could hear her frustration through the line, but I held firm. Richard, in one of his rare direct calls, tried to intimidate me. "Mr. Edward, I hope you understand the importance of this weekend for my business. We don't want any unforeseen issues," he stated, his voice polished but with a veiled threat. "Of course, Richard, I perfectly understand the importance of every commitment," I replied, my voice a silken thread, but with a hidden point of iron. The local media, the small community papers, published notices about this solidarity retreat in memory of Sophia, praising the initiative and the family's generosity in opening the doors of their cabin for such a noble cause. I knew that this news, in a social circle as small as ours, would eventually reach Richard's ears. But I also knew that he, in his arrogance, would dismiss it as small-town nonsense, focusing only on his own grandiose plans. That was the beauty of my plan, the invisibility of my intent. The approaching date brought a growing anxiety, but also a strange sense of peace. It was the peace of someone who knows they are doing the right thing, that they are honoring the memory of the one they love. I would sit on the porch at night, watching the stars, and feel Sophia's presence beside me. I imagined her smile, the sparkle in her eyes upon seeing the cabin, our refuge, transformed into a place of welcome for those who needed it most. She always believed in the power of kindness, in the silent strength of altruism. The seniors from Hope's Harbor Senior Center began to arrive on Saturday morning, my birthday. 3 vans, painted with the institution's logo, made their way up the dirt road to the cabin. I stood at the entrance, my heart beating to a different rhythm, a mix of emotion and anticipation. With every face I saw, a new smile bloomed on my own. They were men and women with stories written in their wrinkles, some with a distant gaze, others with the liveliness of children. They got out of the vans, some with the help of volunteers, and their curious eyes fixed on the cabin, on its flowers and its welcoming simplicity. The lawn, where Anne and Richard had envisioned an extravagant party with luxury cars and loud music, was now occupied with conversation circles, board games spread on colorful blankets, and the soft laughter of the seniors. The smell of prime rib they had expected was replaced by the welcoming aroma of cinnamon tea and the apple spice cake Laura had prepared with so much love. Volunteers, young and full of enthusiasm, served snacks and hot drinks, while a few reporters from community papers recorded the event with their discreet cameras. The main gate, where Richard had hoped to display his new acquisition, was adorned not with security guards, but with a delicate handmade banner that Luke had prepared. "Welcome to the Solidarity Retreat, in memory of a great woman." The property was alive, but with a different energy, a vibration of peace and purpose that was palpable. I was there, in the midst of it all, feeling a deep satisfaction, a sense that on that day, I had somehow reclaimed a piece of myself and honored Sophia's memory. But the day was not yet over, and I knew that the centerpiece of my plan was about to unfold, the moment when the truth would be gently revealed, and I was ready. The autumn sun, with its soft, golden light, bathed the cabin, highlighting the vibrant colors of the leaves that covered the ground. The air, once heavy with expectation and hurt, now vibrated with the cheerful buzz of conversations and the restrained laughter of the seniors. Mrs. Eleanor, a lady with vivid eyes and hair as white as snow, sat near Sophia's rosebush, knitting with admirable concentration, while beside her, Mr. Joseph, a retired history teacher with an encyclopedic memory, narrated tales of his youth to a small group. I walked among them, offering a smile, a word of comfort, feeling light in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. It was as if every laugh, every gesture of affection exchanged there, was a balm for the wounds Anne's ingratitude had opened in my heart. My sister-in-law Laura circulated with a tray of fresh herbal tea, the aroma of chamomile and mint mingling with the smell of damp earth. Uncle Frank, silent as always but with a satisfied glint in his eye, helped Mrs. Agnes, who had difficulty walking, to sit in one of the more comfortable chairs. Luke, my nephew, with his infectious energy, organized a makeshift game of checkers, and I could hear the exclamations of fun from the participants. It was a symphony of kindness and solidarity, a stark contrast to the party of ostentation that had been planned for the same location. That scene, once marked by the pain of betrayal, was now a stage for the celebration of life, memory, and love. My heart, however, still held a place for tension, a small pang of apprehension that reminded me of what was to come. I knew their time was approaching. The vans of Richard's family, with their 30 occupants, must already be on the dirt road leading to the cabin. I positioned myself near the entrance with a calmness that surprised me, a mix of nervousness and a strange peace. I took a deep breath, feeling the pure mountain air, and prepared myself. That's when I saw them. First, the chrome glint of a luxury car, followed by two others coming up the dusty road. The sound of the engines, previously muffled by the sounds of nature and conversation, began to grow louder, breaking the tranquility of the environment. The first car, an imposing black sedan, stopped in front of the gate adorned with the banner that read, "Welcome to the Solidarity Retreat, in memory of a great woman." The tinted window lowered slowly, revealing Richard's face. His eyes, once full of a disguised, triumphant gleam, now displayed an expression of perplexity that quickly turned to irritation. His mouth opened slightly, as if trying to form a question that couldn't find its shape. I could see his brow furrow into a scowl. Anne was sitting beside him, her face pale and her eyes wide, fixed on the scene unfolding before her. The forced smile she used to wear in our video calls had vanished, replaced by an astonishment that bordered on terror. She seemed unable to believe what she was seeing. The other cars stopped behind, and I could see the curious and confused faces of Richard's relatives peering through the windows. Mr. Harrington, Richard's father, a man of austere demeanor and a judgmental gaze, was in one of the cars, his expression of disapproval already evident before he even got out. I walked toward Richard's car with slow, steady steps, a gentle but unshakable smile on my lips. I could feel the gazes of everyone present, from the seniors to the volunteers, falling upon the scene. The tension in the air was almost palpable. As I approached, Richard finally managed to articulate a few words, his voice a mixture of surprise and restrained anger. "Edward, what is happening here?" he asked, his voice low but laden with a poorly disguised indignation. Anne, beside him, opened the car door with a small jolt, and her teary eyes met mine. There was no longer the coldness of her calls, only a mixture of confusion and maybe, just maybe, a glimpse of shame. "Dad, what is all this?" she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. I, maintaining my calm, looked directly at Richard and then at Anne, allowing my eyes to convey a serenity that contrasted with the storm brewing on their faces. "What a wonderful surprise. Have you come to join our charity event?" I asked, my voice calm and firm, without a hint of accusation. Just an almost inviting kindness. The shock and contained fury in them were visible, a living canvas of uncontrolled emotions. The public humiliation was unfolding, and the reputation Richard fought so hard to build was hanging by a thread, right there, under the eyes of his family and the local press. I knew that, at that moment, any aggressive reaction would turn them into villains, and that was my advantage. I awaited their reaction, the desperation beginning to appear in their eyes, not knowing how to extricate themselves from the trap of dignity and altruism I had meticulously built. The game was just beginning. The silence that followed my question was thick, heavy, as if the air had been sucked from their lungs. Richard, who moments before seemed about to explode, was now pale, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes sweeping the scene around him, the smiling seniors, the attentive volunteers, the community newspaper reporters discreetly recording the event. He looked like a predator who, instead of finding his prey, had stumbled into a field of flowers, unable to understand the landscape. Anne, for her part, brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes once teary, now wide with a mixture of astonishment and dread. She looked at Richard, then at me, a dance of desperation on her face. Richard's family, who had gotten out of the other cars, was visibly confused. Mr. Harrington, Richard's father, with his imposing posture, approached, his expression of disapproval deepening. He cast a censorious glance at his son, as if expecting an explanation. I could see the murmur of whispers among them, the looks of disapproval directed at Richard and Anne. The scene they had expected to find, an exclusive and ostentatious party, had been replaced by a charity event with an atmosphere of genuine kindness. "Mr. Edward, what is the meaning of this?" Mr. Harrington asked, his voice grave, but with a tone of surprise that bordered on disbelief. He seemed to struggle to comprehend the situation, his expectations completely thwarted. His eyes scanned the welcome banner, the table of teas and cakes, the serene faces of the seniors. He was a businessman, accustomed to controlled scenarios, and this one was clearly not under his control. I maintained my smile, a smile of genuine welcome without a trace of irony. "It means we are celebrating the Solidarity Retreat, Mr. Harrington, a tribute to my late wife, Sophia, who always dedicated her time and love to those in need," I explained, my voice calm and clear for all to hear. "It's an event in partnership with the Hope's Harbor Senior Center, an institution that supports lonely elders. We are very happy to share the beauty of our cabin with them on this special day." The words were simple, but their impact was devastating. Richard, trying to compose himself, coughed, and I could see sweat trickling down his forehead, despite the mild autumn weather. Anne, in her anguish, shook her head, her eyes seeking mine as if asking for a private explanation, a way out of this embarrassing situation, but I offered none. I just held my steady gaze, my expression tranquil, watching the drama unfold. One of the community reporters, a young woman with a notebook and a camera slung around her neck, approached discreetly. "Mr. Edward, this is a beautiful initiative. Could you tell us a little more about the inspiration for this event?" she asked, her voice soft but her gaze sharp. I knew this was the perfect opportunity to solidify the narrative. "Of course," I replied, turning slightly toward her, but still keeping Anne and Richard in my field of vision. Sophia always believed that true wealth is not in what one accumulates, but in what one shares. This cabin, which we built with so much love, has always been a place with open doors. And on my birthday, there could be no more meaningful way to celebrate life and her legacy than by offering a little care and welcome to those who need it most. My words, filled with sincere emotion, contrasted brutally with the atmosphere of embarrassment that enveloped Richard and his family. Mr. Harrington, with a nod, seemed to grasp the magnitude of the situation. He looked at Richard with an expression that was not of anger, but of deep disappointment. The message was clear. His son had failed miserably in his attempt to impress. Richard, realizing there was no way to salvage the situation, made one last grasp at dignity. "Well, Dad, it seems there's been a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice tense. "We thought the cabin would be available for a family gathering, but of course, this charity event is much more important." He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Anne, beside him, shrank, her eyes still pleading. His family, visibly irritated by the long drive and the embarrassing situation, began to murmur, "We came all this way for this," I heard a woman say under her breath. "Oh, what a lack of organization," grumbled another. The long journey turned into a bitter return, a silent defeat. I had simply reclaimed my space, turning an act of profound selfishness into a celebration of love and memory. The lesson was delivered without a single shout, without a rude word. Only kindness, truth, and integrity prevailed. Richard and Anne, with nowhere to go and nothing to do, the humiliation etched in every glance directed at them, had to swallow their pride. I watched them, powerless, get back into their luxury cars, which now seemed out of place in the simple setting. The engines roared again, and they drove away, leaving behind only a cloud of dust and a silence that now seemed lighter and sweeter. As I watched them leave, I felt immense relief, but also a pang of sadness. My daughter had drifted away, and I didn't know if she would ever come back. But at least on that day, I had defended what was mine, what was ours, and the cabin, our sanctuary, was at peace again, filled with the energy Sophia would have loved. I had won the battle, but the war for my daughter seemed far from over. The retreat day continued with a beauty and simplicity that calmed the turbulence in my chest. The seniors, after the brief interlude of the noisy arrival and departure of Richard's cars, returned to their activities, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. Mrs. Eleanor continued to knit, Mr. Joseph to tell his stories, and the cabin remained a haven of peace. I allowed myself to enjoy that moment, the satisfaction of seeing Sophia's house filled with the kind of joy she would have wanted. However, behind the apparent serenity, a new pain began to settle in, the uncertainty about the future of my relationship with Anne. The victory at the cabin was sweet, but the price, deepening the chasm between father and daughter, seemed far too high. At night, when the last of the seniors had gone to their rooms and Luke and the volunteers were finishing cleaning up, I sat on the porch again. The sky was speckled with stars, and the sound of crickets filled the air. Laura and Frank, sitting with me, shared a comfortable silence. They looked at me with affection, understanding the complexity of my emotions. "You did the right thing, Edward," Laura said, her voice as soft as a caress. Sophia would have been very proud. Her words were a balm, but they didn't erase the image of Anne's face, her eyes wide with shock and shame. The days following the retreat were marked by a terrifying silence from Anne and Richard. No calls, no messages, just the echo of their departure. I had expected an explosion of anger, an attempt at justification, but nothing came. That absence hurt me more than any confrontation. It was as if the bridge that connected our hearts had been burned, and now only emptiness remained. Luke and my in-laws continued to support me, visiting and making sure I didn't feel alone. They were my anchor in a sea of uncertainty. About 2 weeks after the incident, the cabin's routine had returned to its usual quiet, but my inner peace was still fragile. I was pruning Sophia's roses, a task that always brought me a deep connection to her, when the landline, which rarely rang, surprised me. It was an unfamiliar number from the city. I hesitated for a moment, thinking of not answering, but something compelled me to. "Hello?" I said, my voice a bit hoarse. "Mr. Edward?" A young, hesitant female voice asked from the other end. "My name is Lucy. I'm Dr. Walter Jennings's assistant." My heart sped up. Walter. Was it about the life estate clause? But he had already confirmed its validity. "Yes, this is he." "Has something happened to Walter?" I asked, a pang of concern. "No, sir, Dr. Jennings is fine. He asked me to contact you about a sensitive matter, something he thought it was important for you to know personally." Her voice was serious, and my gut told me this was no triviality. "What is it about Lucy?" I asked, trying to stay calm, but feeling a knot form in my stomach. "It's about your daughter, Anne, and your son-in-law, Richard," she replied, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "Dr. Jennings has come across some concerning information about the financial situation of Mr. Harrington, Richard's father. It seems his company is in serious trouble, much worse than imagined, and Richard, consequently, is also in a delicate position. I listened in shock, the pruning shears slipping from my hands and falling to the grass. This was not what I expected. Richard's intention to use my cabin to impress potential investors now made a much darker kind of sense. He wasn't just seeking status, he was desperate. Lucy continued, her voice serious. Dr. Jennings has discovered that Richard is under enormous pressure to keep up appearances. There are considerable debts, and the Harrington family's reputation is at risk. What's more worrying, Mr. Edward, is that Anne, she seems to be involved in some of these transactions, perhaps without full awareness of the gravity. Her last words struck me like lightning. Anne, my daughter, at risk because of Richard's unbridled ambition. My blood ran cold. The hurt from her ingratitude was suddenly replaced by an overwhelming fear. The turning point had arrived, not in the form of a personal victory, but as a veiled threat to my own daughter. I was no longer just a hurt father. I was a protector, and my daughter, despite her choices, was still my daughter. This moment wasn't about the cabin, nor about the humiliation. It was about Anne and the danger that surrounded her. I had to act, and fast, but how? And what would I do if she was already deeply involved? The phone slipped from my hands and fell onto the soft grass, but I barely noticed. The revelation from Lucy, Walter's assistant, hit me with the force of a tidal wave, turning my world upside down. Anne involved in Richard's shady business. That phrase echoed in my mind, overriding any hurt or resentment. My daughter, whom I had always imagined protected and safe, now seemed to be on the brink of an abyss, pulled in by my son-in-law's web of ambition and desperation. The pruning shears lay forgotten, and I, Edward, the guardian of the cabin, suddenly felt disarmed, facing an invisible and far more dangerous enemy than mere vanity. My heart, which had once burned with silent fury, now beat with a rhythm of worry. The unconditional love of a father, which for a time had seemed overshadowed by the pain of ingratitude, resurfaced with overwhelming force. I couldn't just ignore this. Anne was my daughter, my blood, and the possibility that she was in danger consumed me. I needed to understand the extent of the problem, and I needed to act, even if it meant swallowing my pride and confronting Richard and Anne directly. I called Walter's office back, my voice trembling but filled with urgency. Lucy answered, and I barely waited to ask, "Lucy, please, I need more details. What exactly does involved mean? What are the risks for Anne?" She explained that the information was preliminary, but indicated that Anne's name was appearing on some loan and guarantee documents related to Richard's father's business, which was under investigation. Dr. Jennings, due to his influence and legal contacts, had intercepted this data indirectly, hence the caution in informing me. "We can't say for sure that she has full knowledge of what's happening, Mr. Edward, but her signature is there," Lucy said with a tone of regret. That information was another blow. I spent the night sleepless, pacing the cabin, the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet matching the turmoil in my soul. Images of Sophia, her smile, her advice, came and went like ghosts from a simpler past. I wondered what she would do. Sophia was always the voice of reason, the bridge between me and the world. I needed her wisdom now more than ever. The next day, I gathered my in-laws, Laura and Frank, and told them what I had discovered. Walter had advised me not to expose Lucy or the source, so I used the excuse that Walter had accessed this information through his old contacts in the business world. The shock and concern on their faces were palpable. Laura brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes welling up. "My Anne, how could she get mixed up in something like this?" she lamented, her voice thick with emotion. Frank, with his usual seriousness, just shook his head, his brow furrowed in worry. "We have to help her," I said, my voice firm despite the pain. "No matter what happened, she's still my daughter. I'm not going to abandon her." Laura, with tears in her eyes, hugged me tightly. "That's it. Edward, it's the right thing to do. Sophia would have wanted this. We decided the first step would be to try to talk to Anne, but cautiously, I knew a direct, accusatory approach would only push her further away. She would shut down, defend herself, and perhaps throw herself even more into Richard's arms. I needed to find a way to make her see the truth for herself, or at least open a channel of communication. I called Anne, choosing a time I knew Richard would be at work. My heart pounded. She answered, her voice initially cold and distant, as usual. "Dad, is something wrong?" she asked, without any warmth. "Anne, my dear," I began, trying to keep my voice calm and welcoming. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days. I miss you, sweetheart. I miss our talks, our closeness." I knew I had to break through the barrier of resentment, and love, true love, was the only key. "I know things have been difficult between us, but I will always be your father, and I worry about you. A lot." There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence that felt eternal. I could imagine Anne processing my words, perhaps surprised by the change in tone. Then a deep breath, almost a sigh. "I miss you too, Dad," she finally said, her voice a little softer, but still with a hint of hesitation. "But things are complicated. I know they are. And maybe I can help uncomplicate them. I just want what's best for you," I replied, feeling a small crack of hope open up. "Can you come to the cabin? We need to talk, honey. And it's not about what happened on my birthday. It's about you, about us." I needed her to come, to see that I was there for her, not to judge, but to protect. The risk was great, but I had to try. Anne's future, and perhaps my own, depended on that meeting. The call ended with Anne promising to think about my invitation. That small opening, that brief moment of vulnerability in her voice, was enough to light a new flame of hope in my heart. I knew the path to reconciliation, and more importantly, to her safety, would be long and torturous, but I was determined to walk it. The next day, a text from her appeared on my phone. "I'll be there Saturday afternoon, alone." It was the answer I needed, that alone was a relief, a sign that she might be willing to listen to me without Richard's influence or surveillance. The days leading up to Anne's arrival were filled with a mix of anxiety and meticulous preparation. I wanted the cabin to welcome her with the same warmth and comfort she had known since childhood. I prepared her favorite room with the patchwork quilt Sophia had made for her and the soft scent of lavender that Anne always loved. Laura and Frank, informed of the visit, helped me with the preparations, especially Laura, who baked the chocolate cake Anne was so fond of. They understood that the focus now was not on confrontation, but on connection, on rebuilding a bridge that seemed to have crumbled. On Saturday afternoon, the familiar sound of Anne's car coming up the dirt road sent a shiver down my spine. I went out to the porch, watching her park and get out. She was thinner, her eyes a little sunken, and the vitality I remembered from her youth seemed to have been replaced by a certain melancholy. She looked at me, and a faint, almost forced smile appeared on her lips. "Dad," she said, her voice still hesitant, but without the coldness of our recent conversations. I approached her, and before I could think of any words, she hugged me. A tight, long hug that took me by surprise. I felt the warmth of her body, the familiar scent of her hair, and a wave of emotion washed over me. It was my daughter back, even if for a brief moment, in my arms. "My dear," I whispered, my eyes welling up. "I'm so glad you came." We entered the cabin, and the smell of baked cake seemed to wrap her in an affectionate memory. She looked around, her eyes scanning the rooms, stopping on small details, on photos of Sophia, on the decorative objects that told our family's story. "The cabin is the same," she said, her voice almost a sigh, laden with nostalgia. We sat on the porch, facing the lake. I served the cake and coffee, trying to create an atmosphere of normalcy. We started talking about trivial things, about the weather, the roses, Laura and Frank's health. It was safe ground, a warm-up for the conversation I knew we needed to have. I watched her every gesture, every expression. Her fingers played with her coffee cup. Her eyes averted mine. But her defensive posture was gone. There was a vulnerability, a veiled sadness that broke my heart. After a while, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I decided it was time. I took a deep breath. "Anne, I need to talk to you about something serious," I began, my voice soft but firm. "It's not about my birthday or the retreat, although what happened there hurt me deeply. It's about you and about Richard." She stiffened slightly, and I saw her shoulders tense. Her eyes widened, and she looked at me with a mixture of fear and resentment. "What do you mean, Dad?" she asked, her voice tense, as if preparing for an attack. "I've heard some things, honey. Things about Richard's business, about his father's company. It seems things are not going well, and that you might be involved in some transactions that aren't safe for you," I said, choosing my words carefully, avoiding accusation. "Your name, your signature, might be on documents that you perhaps don't fully understand." Her face turned pale. The coffee cup trembled in her hands. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long while, I saw pure fear in her eyes, a fear that wasn't of me, but of something much bigger. She tried to argue, but her words came out jumbled, unconvincing. "No, Dad, you're mistaken. Richard takes care of everything. He always told me it was all under control. Anne, I trust my friend who gave me this information, and he's a very experienced man, a retired lawyer," I insisted, without raising my voice. "He warned me because he's concerned about you. I'm concerned about you, my daughter. I just want you to be safe, to not be harmed by something that isn't your fault." Tears began to stream down her face, silent and copious. She lowered her head, and I could see her shoulders shaking. I don't know, Dad," she sobbed, her voice choked. "Richard asked me to sign some papers, said they were routine, to facilitate business. I trusted him." It was the confession, the tip of the iceberg of a much more complex and painful story. I moved closer to her, placed my hand on her shoulder, feeling the fragility of her posture. She was broken, and I needed to be her rock, but the full truth still needed to come out. And I knew it wouldn't be easy to draw it from her. Anne's tears streamed down, wetting her hands, and my heart clenched with an almost physical pain. It wasn't the pain of my own humiliation, but the pain of seeing her so fragile, so lost. My hurt gave way to pure compassion, to the undeniable need to protect her. I hugged her again, a father's hug, tight and full of affection, letting her cry on my shoulder. Words weren't necessary at that moment, just my presence. The warmth of my love seemed to be what she needed to unload. When she finally calmed down, drying her tears with the back of her hand, her red-rimmed eyes met mine. There was a mixture of shame and despair in them, but also a glimmer of relief at finally being able to share her burden. "Dad, I didn't want to," she began, her voice still thick with emotion, but clearer now. "Richard pressured me so much. He said I needed to support his family, that it was important for our future. He made me feel guilty if I questioned him." She began to tell me, little by little, how Richard had manipulated her. In the beginning, it was always something small, Dad. A signature for a document he said was routine, bureaucratic. He always had a ready excuse, a convincing story about how vital it was for his father's company, she explained, her voice growing steadier as the truth escaped. "He made me believe it was the least I could do as a wife, as part of the Harrington family." I listened intently, each of her words a shard, fitting into the puzzle that Walter and Lucy had started to assemble. Anne described how Richard had subtly isolated her from me and other friends. "He always found a reason for me not to come to the cabin, not to talk to you. He'd say you wouldn't understand, that you were old-fashioned and didn't get the business world," she confessed, her voice laden with guilt. The coldness in her calls, the distance, it all started to make a painful kind of sense. He had planted seeds of distrust and insecurity in her, severing the ties that connected her to her past, to her essence. He would ask me to go to meetings with him, to fill a seat, as he put it. There, I'd meet investors, important people. He'd introduce me as Richard's wife, the daughter of the owner of the cabin in the mountains, she revealed, and I could see the pain in her eyes as she realized the irony of her own words. He wanted me to sign loan guarantees, saying it was just a formality, that there was no risk, that the Harrington family name was a guarantee in itself. She looked at me, her eyes welling up again. I didn't read the documents carefully, Dad. I trusted him. He said we were a team, that we needed to support each other. Her naivety, her blind trust in a man who was using her, broke my heart. She told me about a specific loan from a small bank but with exorbitant interest rates, where she had signed as a guarantor without knowing the full extent of the liability. He said it was for an innovative project, but now I hear Richard on the phone, hiding, talking about his father's company, about debts. He's desperate. Dad, her voice trembled as she confessed Richard's latest request. He asked me to put the cabin up as collateral for a new loan. Dad, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He said it was the only way to save his father's company, to save our future. I haven't signed it yet, but he's pressuring me a lot. My body went cold. The cabin. He wanted to use our sanctuary, Sophia's legacy, as a bargaining chip in his dirty dealings. The audacity. The lack of character in Richard D. was something I could barely comprehend, but the crucial piece of information was that Anne had not yet signed. There was a chance. A small but vital chance. I held Anne's hands firmly. Honey, you are not going to sign anything, I said, my voice calm but with an unshakable determination. I am going to help you. No matter what happens, you are not alone. We will solve this together. Your father is here. That moment, her hand in mine, was proof that, despite everything, the bond between us still existed, and it was strong. But the revelation of Richard wanting to use the cabin as collateral for an unsustainable loan raised an even bigger red flag. The situation was far more serious than I had imagined, and I knew we had to act with the utmost urgency to protect Anne and our cabin from an imminent disaster. Her trust in Richard had been her downfall, but now I would be her salvation. Anne's revelation about the cabin as collateral for an unsustainable loan hit me like a thunderclap. The pain and hurt I felt for her quickly morphed into a cold, controlled fury directed at Richard. He wasn't just an ambitious man. He was a predator who was manipulating my daughter and trying to destroy Sophia's legacy. I had to act with speed and strategy to dismantle his web of deceit. Anne's fragility in my hands was a constant reminder that I needed to be the strength she couldn't be at that moment. Anne, listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice a firm whisper so as not to frighten her further. You will not sign anything. It doesn't matter what Richard says, no matter how much pressure he applies. The cabin has a life estate clause in my name. That means that as long as I am alive, no one can do anything with this property without my express permission. It's legally ironclad. I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, mixed with visible relief. It was as if an immense weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That night, with Anne asleep in her childhood room, I called Walter again. I told him about Anne's latest revelations, about the loans and Richard's attempt to use the cabin as collateral. Walter's voice, once calm and measured, now carried a note of indignation. Edward, this is very serious. Richard is trying to involve Anne in fraud and, worse, in an asset-stripping scheme. We need to act cautiously, but firmly. He advised me to have Anne gather all the documents she had signed, even the ones Richard had dismissed as routine. We needed concrete evidence to understand the extent of her involvement and protect her legally. We also needed to alert the bank to the illegality of attempting to use a property with a life estate as collateral. The next day, Anne was calmer, though still shaken. Breakfast was in a thoughtful silence, broken only by the chirping of birds. I encouraged her to be strong, to face the situation head-on. "Honey, the first thing we need to do is gather every document you've signed," I said, my voice conveying a confidence I wanted her to feel. "No matter what Richard says, you need to get them. If he asks, tell him it's for your records, to have copies." Something like that. "Be careful." Anne, with a mix of fear and determination, agreed. She told me Richard kept the documents in a safe in their home office. "He has the key, Dad. I don't have easy access." That information was an obstacle, but not an insurmountable one. While Anne tried to find a way to access the documents, Walter and I began to map out a strategy. He suggested I write a formal letter to the bank, with a copy to their lawyers, informing them of the cabin's life estate clause, making it clear that any attempt to use the property as collateral would be illegal and challenged in court. This would create an immediate barrier to Richard's plans. Laura and Frank, upon being informed of the gravity of the situation, offered to stay by Anne's side, to give her emotional support and, if necessary, accompany her in her search for the documents. The unity of our family was our greatest strength. 3 days later, Anne called, her voice a mix of fear and triumph. "Dad, I got them," she exclaimed. "Richard left for a last-minute trip. I found the key to the safe and took all the papers with my signature and the cabin's name on them." I felt immense relief. "That's wonderful, honey. Come to the cabin immediately. Don't worry about anything." When Anne arrived, she brought a thick folder of documents. Walter, who was already on his way to the cabin at my request, and I sat at the kitchen table, spreading out the papers. Each sheet was a piece of a dark puzzle. There were loan guarantees, service contracts, and yes, many of Anne's signatures. Her name was entangled in debts and commitments she barely understood. Walter's face tightened in concern as he read the terms. "Anne, you were on the edge of a cliff," he said, his voice grave. "But we caught it in time. It's a good thing you didn't sign that last document about the cabin." I felt a chill run down my spine, seeing the extent of the damage Richard had caused. But at the same time, a new determination grew within me. I would not only protect her legally, but I would help her get back on her feet, to rebuild her life away from Richard's manipulative shadow. The challenge was immense. But our family's unity and Anne's courage to face the truth gave me strength. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt we were on the right path. The pile of documents on the cabin's kitchen table seemed to grow as Walter examined them, revealing the complexity and depth of the trap Richard had set for Anne. Each contract, each signed guarantee, was another thread in this web of deceit. Anne sat beside me, pale, her eyes fixed on the papers as if only now understanding the true scale of her vulnerability. The pain on her face was palpable, and I held her hand, offering as much support as I could. Walter, with the calm of a surgeon before a delicate operation, explained the legal terms, the predatory clauses, the risks Anne was exposed to. "Anne, many of these are high-risk loans, and some were guaranteed with your personal assets, or what Richard believed to be yours. It's a serious situation, but not impossible to reverse, especially since we have your cooperation and proof that the cabin could not have been used as collateral," he stated, trying to reassure her without downplaying the gravity. He looked at me and shook his head, a gesture of disbelief at Richard's audacity. Rage simmered within me, but I kept it in check. This was not the time for outbursts, but for reason and strategy. My priority was to protect Anne and untangle her name from Richard's shady business dealings. Laura and Frank arrived shortly after, bringing dinner, but the atmosphere in the kitchen was too heavy for food. They sat, listening silently to Walter's explanations, and with each new revelation, their faces contorted with worry and indignation. "So, what can we do, Walter?" I asked, my voice a thread of steel. How can we protect Anne and expose Richard? Walter explained that the strategy would be twofold. First, formally notify all creditors through a legal process of Richard's bad faith and Anne's involvement, making it clear that she was a victim of manipulation and that many of the documents may have been signed under duress or without full knowledge. Second, initiate divorce and asset separation proceedings for Anne as quickly as possible, so she could legally disentangle herself from Richard and his debts. We need to be fast before he tries to drag Anne even further down with him, Walter warned. Anne listened to it all with a mixture of shock and growing determination. The initial shame was beginning to be replaced by a quiet revolt. I can't believe he did this to me, she whispered, her voice filled with pain. I loved him, Dad. I trusted him. It was the awakening, the recognition of betrayal. And in that moment, I saw the Anne I knew, my daughter, beginning to re-emerge from the shadow in which she had been trapped. We decided that Anne would stay at the cabin for a while, away from Richard. It would be her safe harbor while we dealt with the bureaucracy and legal implications. Laura and Frank offered their full support, ensuring Anne would have an environment of love and security. From that moment, the cabin became not just a refuge for seniors, but a sanctuary for my daughter, a place of healing and rebirth. The days that followed were intense. Walter and his team, with the help of Luke, who had contacts in the communication field, began gathering more evidence and preparing the legal documents. Anne and I spent hours talking, and she would unburden herself, reliving every moment of Richard's manipulation, every false promise, every lie. It was a painful process, but necessary for her to break free from his influence. News of the impending divorce and Anne's accusations against Richard began to circulate in their social circles. Richard, caught off guard by my intervention and Anne's breaking of her silence, tried to call me, attempting to intimidate me again, but I didn't answer. Anne, for her part, was stronger. I don't want to talk to him, Dad. I don't want to hear any more lies. The tensest moment came when Walter scheduled a meeting with the lawyers of the involved banks, with Anne and me present. It was the moment to legally confront the truth, to expose the fraud. Anne was nervous, but determined. I'm ready, Dad. I'm not going to be manipulated anymore. In the boardroom, the atmosphere was charged. The bank's lawyers seemed skeptical at first. But as Walter presented the evidence, the forged signatures, the manipulated documents, and crucially, the cabin's life estate clause, their expressions changed. The truth of our case was undeniable. They knew a scandal involving the Harrington family, and fraud would be disastrous for their institutions. The reputation of Richard and his father, already fragile, was crumbling. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the rustling of papers. And there, in that decisive moment, I felt we were finally turning the tables for good, not with revenge, but with truth and justice. Anne's path to freedom was opening up, but the consequences of the truth were yet to come. The boardroom was steeped in a heavy silence, broken only by the sliding of papers and restrained sighs. With every document Walter presented, every detail of Richard's scheme that was unveiled, the expressions of the bank's lawyers shifted from skepticism to growing concern. Anne, sitting beside me, maintained an upright posture, her eyes fixed on the faces of those present, a quiet courage emanating from her. I felt an immense pride in my daughter, who, despite all her suffering, was finding the strength to face the truth and fight for her freedom. The climax of the meeting arrived when Walter presented the cabin's deed and the life estate clause in my name. This document, gentlemen, is irrefutable proof that the cabin could not, under any circumstances, be offered as collateral on any loan. What Mr. Richard Harrington attempted to do by inducing my client, Mrs. Anne, to endorse such an action constitutes not only an attempt at fraud against this family, but also against your own financial institutions. Walter declared, his voice firm and incisive. Mrs. Anne was a victim of manipulation and coercion, and we are here to ensure she is disassociated from all these commitments, and that the truth about the practices of Mr. Richard Harrington and his family is fully revealed. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances. One of them, a man with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. Dr. Jennings, we understand the gravity of the situation. It is evident there was bad faith on the part of Mr. Richard Harrington, he conceded, his voice visibly tense. The reputation of our institutions is paramount. We cannot be associated with illicit practices. That was the definitive turning point. They didn't want a scandal, and we had the evidence needed to cause one. After long hours of negotiation, we reached an agreement. The banks, to avoid a lawsuit that would publicly expose Richard's conduct and the risk of being associated with fraud, agreed to remove Anne's name from all loan and guarantee documents. She would be freed from all the debts and commitments Richard had made in her name without her full consent. In return, we would agree not to take the case public, maintaining discretion about Richard's misconduct regarding the financial institutions, but we would proceed with a formal complaint to the authorities regarding the manipulation and coercion against Anne. It was a victory for Anne, a chance to start over. We left the meeting with a sense of relief and exhaustion. Anne, with tears in her eyes, hugged me again. "Dad, you saved me. You saved my life," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I held her tightly, feeling the lightness of her body, the release from an invisible weight. "You saved yourself, honey. You had the courage to face the truth." The divorce proceedings for Anne and Richard were expedited. Without the foundation of his manipulations and with his true intentions exposed, Richard had no grounds to contest. The Harrington family's reputation crumbled in business circles, and Richard's father's company, already unstable, was severely impacted, eventually leading to bankruptcy. Richard, without the financial and social support that had propped him up, saw his world fall apart. He tried, on several occasions, to contact Anne with threats and emotional blackmail, but she, strengthened by our unity and legal support, stood firm, refusing to yield to any more of his manipulations. Anne, now free from Richard, needed a new beginning. She decided to stay at the cabin for a while, to reconnect with herself and her roots. Laura and Frank, ever present, supported her every step of the way. I, for my part, dedicated my time to her, offering a friendly shoulder, a listening ear, and the unconditional love of a father. We talked for hours on the porch under the starry sky about her fears, her dreams, her hopes. She told me how the absence of her mother had left her vulnerable and how Richard had exploited that vulnerability. In one of those conversations, she looked at me, her eyes clear and filled with a new light. "Dad, I want to help other people who have gone through what I've gone through," she said, her voice full of conviction. "I want to use my experience to warn people, to protect them. I want to give my life a new purpose." It was the Anne I knew, Sophia's daughter, with her empathy and her desire to do good. The cabin, our sanctuary, became the stage for her transformation. She began working with the Hope's Harbor Senior Center, the charity I had supported. Her life experience made her a valuable counselor for the seniors, many of whom had also faced challenges and disappointments in their lives. She organized activities, listened to their stories, and brought a new sparkle to the institution. I would watch her, a lump in my throat, seeing her blossom again, reclaiming the essence I had feared was lost forever. The emotional resolution wasn't just freedom from Richard's chains, but the rediscovery of her own worth and purpose. The cabin, which had once been the scene of my pain, was now the cradle of a new hope for Anne, and for me. The months turned into a year since the day my daughter, Anne, found refuge at the cabin. The scent of worked wood and damp earth, once the perfume of my solitary peace, now mingled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies and the infectious laughter of children who visited Hope's Harbor, brought by Anne to interact with the seniors. The cabin had become a beacon of hope, not just for those seeking shelter, but for us, for Anne and me, a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Anne flourished. Her eyes, once shadowed and fearful, now shone with a light of their own, the vitality of someone who has found a new purpose. She devoted herself body and soul to the institution, using her intelligence and her newfound strength to make a difference. She created mentorship programs, where seniors shared their life stories with young volunteers, building bridges between generations. Her face radiated joy when she showed me the drawings the children made for their honorary grandparents at Hope's Harbor, or when she listened to one of the seniors who had once lived in isolation recite a poem he had written. Our conversations, which had once been a painful rehashing of the past, now revolved around future plans, new projects for the institution, and how we could expand our help. She had found her voice, her true self, far from Richard's manipulative shadow. The wound of betrayal was still there, a scar that reminded her of the fragility of trust, but also of her capacity to overcome. She would tell me about the lessons learned, about the importance of trusting her own instincts and surrounding herself with people who loved her unconditionally. My father's heart, which had felt broken for so long, was now whole, filled with a joy I never thought I would feel again. Seeing Anne rise again, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, was the greatest gift life could give me. The bonds we had rebuilt were stronger than ever, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by love. Conversations with Laura and Frank became lighter, filled with gratitude for seeing our Anne back, and even better than before. Luke, my nephew, continued to support Anne in her projects, now not as an accomplice in a scheme, but as a partner in a noble cause. 1 year after the Solidarity Retreat, on my birthday, the cabin was once again filled with life. But this time, it was a different celebration. Anne had organized a small, intimate party with just Laura, Frank, Luke, and some of the closest seniors from Hope's Harbor. The smell of apple spice cake, Sophia's favorite, filled the house, and the sound of an acoustic guitar filled the air. During the party, Anne stood up, holding a small glass of wine. Her eyes met mine, and a wide, genuine smile spread across her face. "Dad," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "1 year ago, on this very day, I was lost. I was letting another man's ambition define me, blind me to what was truly important. I hurt you, I hurt my mother's memory, and I nearly lost myself." She paused, taking a deep breath, and tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of gratitude, not pain. "But you, Dad, with your integrity, your quiet strength, and your unconditional love, you saved me. You showed me that true wealth isn't in material possessions or status, but in generosity, compassion, and family ties." She turned to all the guests. "This cabin